you guys are helping organizations in this pursuit. And I think in both of your introductions, you talked about why B Corp for your companies, but why B Corp for the folks that you're helping. If you could speak a little bit to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so building on Christina's comment about the not-for-profit sector, again, I spent 10 years working for not-for-profits and, big problems and brave solutions and all of that. But ultimately, nonprofits are 7% of US GDP and something similarly small globally. And from my seat, we need more than 7% of change these days in the world. And so, I felt really strongly that the private sector needed to be part of that, as well as obviously policy change, which B Lab certainly is doing increasingly a great job of. And so for me, it was really exciting to have a way. So beyond CSR, right? Okay, great. Companies write a check. We've got a little extra revenue this year. Let's support the local soccer team and cut a ribbon. It looks fabulous in the annual report. Okay. But to me, what B Corp represents is the core of what we do, right? And so as I was coming back to look at the private sector, my belief was, yes, it's amazing to, teach kids to read and to get through college, or, to help people re-enter after incarceration or whatever these things might be. But we also need awesome bagel shops in Raleigh, and shoemakers in New York that are resoling your shoes from pounding the pavement all day. And if they're paying living wages and buying sustainable ingredients and doing all of these things, that's what changes the world, right? We can't all be working on cancer cures or getting kids through college. We don't need 7.8 billion people doing that, right? We need bagel makers and shoemakers and investment bankers and lawyers and accountants and all of these humans, but we need them to be doing their work in a way that's good for each other and good for the world. And so that's what's really exciting to me about the B Corp certification and the companies that we're helping. It's around retention, engagement, and motivation of employees. And again, that's what provides such magic, because we don't all have to just wish that we were tutoring kids or being a nurse. We can be investment bankers and bagel makers and feel really purposeful.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Nell said. And it's interesting because I also have a background in the nonprofit sector. So there are many nonprofit refugees in the B Corp community. And like Christina, I actually shifted gears and went to grad school, studied sustainable enterprise. And when I first learned about B Corps, it was back in 2008. So the founding B Corps had been certified in 2007. I learned about B Corps in 2008. I told my employer at the time, we should do this. So we actually got certified in 2009. And then when I started my business, it was just a no-brainer. I was going to be a B Corp, just never even thought twice about it or looked back. The reason why I think the movement is so important, and this is really what jumped out at me early on, is that the certification and the impact assessment really do two things. One, the impact assessment provides a framework for assessment and improvement. And so it's not just companies saying that they're doing good, but it's actually looking at how are you measuring this. And my experience, as I'm a sole proprietor. I work with contractors and I work with clients who are also sole proprietors up to, hundreds of employees, and is robust and rigorous enough that it can help the smallest businesses and the largest businesses. And so that was one thing that really kind of jumped out at me early on. The other thing is, and Chris kind of touched upon this a little bit during his keynote, is there is that legal requirement that you need to meet as a B Corp. So again, it's not just going through a third-party certification, but it's actually amending your articles of incorporation to say that you're going to take all stakeholders into account. And so in the process of doing that, what I see is that the certification is providing a means of driving systemic change, which ultimately is, I believe, is what we need. And so when we look at why are people coming into the movement, why does a sole proprietor get certified? Why does somebody who's in the B2B sector, and maybe there's not necessarily that consumer facing attention that you're going to get, why do these companies join the movement? Certainly there's a lot of reasons, but in the people that I talk to, part of it is recognizing that individually our companies aren't going to be able to make a change. Forrest Marsh is not going to be able to make the change that we need to see on their own. Neither is George's company or Nell's or mine or Christina's. So, but when we join together and we're part of this global movement, and there are certified B Corps on, all 6 out of the 7 continents, except for Antarctica. I'm still waiting for the day when that's going to happen. But you look at the number of businesses that are certified as B Corps, and actually there's more growth outside of the US than in the US, even though the movement did start here in the US. So when we look at the long term, how do we shift capitalism from the shareholder model to the stakeholder model? It involves groups of companies coming together, and that's why the Imperative 21 initiative, which is a coalition of coalitions that B Lab has recently joined, these movements are very, very important. So that's why I just get so excited when I see the growth in the Southeast, the growth in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, because ultimately I believe that that's what we need.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolina. So I'm going to jump in because the Q&A's stacking up. So I'm going to jump into that. Some of the questions are directed, are in response to certain comments that were made, but I would ask every one of the panelists to jump in with any thought that they might have relevant to the question. And some of them are very timely. So the first that I see, Chris, there was a question about whether you're seeing growth in the movement amongst minority-owned businesses, and if you have any data to support that, or anything anecdotal from those of you that are working with businesses. I can add a couple of comments to it later as well.
So I don't have anything systematic, although I do know, I've been, focusing a lot. So in addition to the book, I'm writing a series of Forbes and Medium pieces on B corporations, and a number of them I've done sort of focusing on, sort of BIPOC owned and focused companies. One of which some of you may know of is Tiffany Jana's consulting firm, TMI. Talked to her actually about you, and she's actually much more, I think, on the front lines of this than I am, and you can read the interview with her on my Forbes channel where we go into this in more detail. But her assessment is that there's not as large a growth among minority group founders, and that it is an overwhelmingly white movement so far. So hopefully we'll improve, and maybe that's not the most optimistic of an answer, but I that would be what I would say. I don't know if any of the panelists have similar or different.
I would just offer to Carolina's point about this impact assessment creates a framework, and in large part it motivates your company to continue the journey to make change. Our own company's story in 2 categories. While we've always been open-minded, and because we work for the federal government, the government requires quotas from suppliers and subcontractors. We didn't have a formal mechanism to ensure that our supplier base was diverse in the context of minority-owned in particular. So there's an example of, over last year, we've created a program to formally introduce Forrest Marsh Group to a network of minority-owned businesses, with the expectation that one day we will be able to do business with them. Internally, and the conversation around race has become very important at Forrest Marsh Group, and we've taken the context of not just not being racist, but this concept of being anti-racist and creating programs that actively work to promote good programs, good policies. To the point, we now have several affinity groups, and we're only about 300 people big, but I am surprised at the popularity of these affinity groups for particular types of people, if you will, to join together and just have conversations or work on specific projects, whether they're client-facing or internal. So I think kind of to your point on this topic, those are two areas that we've benefited from.
Any other thoughts on that? I know for our work, and those attendees may be familiar with Best For programs, although they're less frequently being executed. But Best For programs are jurisdictionally based attempts to bring in as many businesses as possible to utilize one of the tools. It used to be the Quick Impact Assessment. Now it's the SDG Action Manager to help companies measure what matters and begin to commit to making improvement. And so for us here at B Local Mid-Atlantic and for those programs, it is less about B Corp certification and more about helping companies measure what matters, as we say, understand their impact and make change. So as Andy said, as we try to drive the movement and increase diversity in the movement, it isn't necessarily, although ideally it would be fantastic, but it isn't necessarily about getting more Black and brown owned businesses to certify as B Corps, but it is to drive business activity through those organizations. And so, our Best For DMV program, the District, Maryland, and Virginia program is actually specifically oriented towards attracting those businesses to participate. And again, it's not about getting them to certify, but it's about getting them into this community, which we all know, all of us have been in this for a number of years. There's nothing close, at least not for me professionally, there's nothing close to the enthusiasm and intelligence and information and camaraderie that I get in any other community that comes close to what happens in the B Corp community. And so if we can expand that group and bring more and more in, all the better. Any other experiences amongst the panelists in terms of attracting Black and brown businesses into the movement?
I would just add that it's super important and we're doing super inadequately. I mean, Eileen Fisher is really generous to host a gathering every spring for the female CEOs, women identifying CEOs in the community, which is awesome. And it's always a very white room. And, there are a handful of Black and brown women and trying to think about ways to do that. There's an awesome group that has been adjacent called the Dismantle Collective that is doing some really good and important work. So I encourage people to follow and support them as well. But I think, let no movement hereforth exclude any group. And it's not okay that, it's great to be buying more from suppliers, but we need to shift. I know someone asked about version 7 of the BIA, and I would love to see B Lab being really intentional about a community design effort to bring business owners of color into that, because obviously to date, it's not working as is.
And just to add to that, it's complex. So as someone who works with, a handful of early stage startups, if you've got to get your foundation together first, right? Like you have to have a sustainable business model. And, first off, shout out to B Lab. They are offering need-based discounts to underrepresented founders, so women and BIPOC founders, in order to make the assessment accessible financially. But at the same time, it's a huge investment of time, especially if you're a smaller company or you're earlier stage. And, and I've talked to some founders who are like, look, I'm just trying to grow my business. I don't have time to, I want to measure what matters. I want to do the right thing. But it's almost like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's you have to have a sustainable business model. So thinking about supply chains, thinking about how to, get the foundation and have more businesses thrive that are run by both women and BIPOC founders, that's foundational. So then are the resources to be able to then take the time to really get involved in the movement and be plugged into the assessment. And I'm glad to see that we're trying. And also I agree with Nell. There's so much more work to do.
I think that Christina hit upon something very, very important here, which is, when we look at, why certain groups are underrepresented, these are systemic issues, right? Businesses that are started by women and people of color tend to be under-resourced, right? They don't have the same access to capital for a whole host of reasons that other businesses might have. And so in order to be a B Corp, you do need to have that good foundation in place. And that's why the work that Christina is doing, to help these very, very early stage startups, get that foundation in place is really important. This is something that B Lab is very well aware of and very very committed and very intentional about addressing. So that is something that I, related to that question on V7, version 7 of the impact assessment that will come out in 2022. I, would not be surprised to see this being more prominent. B Lab does have a very rigorous process that they go through when they update the standards every 3 years. And so, this is, and they want to keep it relevant and make sure that the important things are being measured. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see more work being done in that area. And I know that, there are discussions within B Lab about, how to address this, and discussions within the broader B Corp community. But I think that being able to look at, how do we address this on a systemic level and make sure that, these companies that have traditionally been under-resourced, have more support so that they can not only grow and be successful, but then also become B Corps. That's all very, very important.
Those comments tie into, sort of a mix of questions related to, the business case for certification as well. As I think all of you just mentioned, there's some foundational issues, systemic issues, but there's also general business operational issues that have to be addressed first and foremost. Now, those of us in the movement feel as if the behavior that's motivated by certification and or measuring what matters are superior behaviors that put you in a better position. But I wonder if you have any comments about the business case. Maybe we'll start with Chris on that, and whether any of your research has revealed. For those of us involved for a very long time, the anecdotal information has always been there, right? We've got great examples of right. Patagonia says this or Danone says this. We've done a little bit of white paper research at Council Fire ourselves on this, but I wonder, Chris, if your research has disclosed some of the business advantages and or data that could be helpful here.
Sure. So if you want real sort of, I guess, statistical quantitative data, there's a variety of places that you can go. Yale has a report that lists some of these items. The thing I quoted, the companies doing better, I think 63% more likely to survive. That was in that Yale report. You can Google that. There's a series of Yale reports that's done around the B Corp. There's been, scores, probably hundreds of studies that have looked at social impact companies. So these are not just B Corps, but companies that actually have a social mission that through, studying their retention compared to other companies, talent attraction and productivity. I think that's where a big set of the business case would be, is actually inside the company. And some of the examples folks described, highlighted that, so I've not done the quantitative research on that myself, but in the book, I actually pulled in a lot of that statistical research and summarize it and compare it to things that I've actually seen in the B Corps that I interviewed. I interviewed over 60 B Corps for the book. I would say there is a consumer facing business case as well. There's a study I know on Ben and Jerry's where actually the extent to which they put a social mission label and then actually explained it a little bit did lead to higher purchasing from some set of consumers. And there's a variety of studies as well that have looked at how, when consumers know about the social mission, that they're actually much more likely to buy. But the issue is people don't know, so from the consumer business case frequently, and without something like the B Corp logo and individuals knowing what that means, there's so much greenwashing, so many scandals that it's actually, the whole thing is very confusing to consumers. So I think over the next number of years, the B logo will become much more aware among consumers, and I think that will actually help direct them.
I have some hard stats if you're interested in hearing them. So first off, Cone Communications Global, they, based on a 2015 study, they said 93% of adults surveyed worldwide demonstrate more trust and loyalty for an organization that's socially responsible. And 91% would actually switch to a new brand, even if it was more expensive. A really cool statistic comes from Unilever in 2019. They shared that their purpose-led sustainable living brands are growing 69% faster than the rest of the business and delivering 75% of the company's growth. Insane. And so we're talking, Ben and Jerry's, Seventh Generation, and many other brands under like what is Unilever. And then from a talent standpoint, some of the harder data is that Deloitte found that 73% of employees who feel that they work for purpose-driven organizations are engaged, whereas only 23% of respondents that don't feel they work for a purpose-driven organization are engaged. So, I mean, we're talking like crazy differences. And then last but certainly not least, there's a bank and company partners. They did a study, Eric Garten and Michael Mankins shared with Harvard Business Review, that they talked about, they did a study on the productivity among satisfied employees. So if they're satisfied, it's 100%. But if they're engaged, it's 144%. And if they're inspired, they're 225% productive. Like, those are compelling statistics that not only do consumers care, but also your employees really care. And being a mission-driven organization matters.
I had some great conversations this spring that kind of echo that and bring to life that, I mean, Chris, obviously the 2008 results are powerful, and it'll be interesting to see in retrospect when we can look back at 2020. But some of the B Corps I talked to had unbelievable results of time to market. So Lisa is a mattress company, and they got 2 new products out to market in the first half of this year. One for hospitals, specifically supporting people in respiratory distress, so designed and built specifically for that need. And then just a new commercial product that was on their product pipeline pre-COVID. And they've reduced their time to market from like 16 months to about 11 weeks in both of those cases, right? So again, like, that's very real money. You can talk to any manager or leader or C-suite exec who may or may not be interested in kind of the green woo-woo new age millennial stuff. But if you offer a way to reduce time to market by 70%, right, that's major dollars. And I think it just speaks again to that sense of this red thread or North Star, right, that we're all working toward a common thing. By the way, Lisa had reduced salaries by 30% in that same time because of COVID stress to their business. So I think it's just so compelling. And I think it's an interesting debate for us, how much we promote like business as a force for good versus like reduce your time to market and increase your productivity, right? There's an interesting debate there.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things when this question comes up, it's a common question, it's a good question, what is a business case for B Corp certification? There is a lot of data out there. Christina just shared some great statistics about businesses that are focused on sustainability and social impact on some level. And that data is great and it's important. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence around B Corps in particular, right? I was on a panel last year. There were, several of us, or like 4 of us on there, and everybody saw improved improved attraction and retention from the smallest businesses like mine to, there was another panelist was from Athleta, a subsidiary of the Gap. And so what has been missing, and this is where the work that Chris is doing, I know Jessica is here, so shout out to the work that the B Academics group is doing. The B Corp movement it's not that old. The founding B Corps were first certified in 2007. We're just entering our 2nd decade. And so we're just, I would say from what I've been seeing, maybe in the last, 3-ish years or so, there's been more attention to how do we actually get data that is specific to B Corps. And the 2008 data is important. But I think that, Nell also just brought up a great point. Now there's going to be a lot more data coming out of 2020, and we're starting to see that. So as the movement continues to grow, as it gains more academic attention, as there's more attention being put on, what are the various ways in which businesses are benefiting from B Corp certification, that body of data, and I believe that business case is only going to be proven even more, and it's going to back up what many of us have been seeing, anecdotally in our experiences.
I'll just echo that. I don't think it's the B logo on our website that's driving. It is the fact that we're a B certified organization that's attracting like-minded talent that is helping me win more business because of who they are. I think that's really where we found the great value from the business case perspective. Being a member of the B community now, Forbes Marsh Group has the opportunity to help influence creating more business for the B community. So we're offering our services pro bono to B Lab as an example to do some studies around consumers from the B to C and B to B standpoint. Where does the B certification stand in the minds of both consumer and business purchasers? And then we're working with them as well within the Beehive, which employees of B certified companies have access to, and we're trying to bridge their directory and their offers into a search engine, if you will, so you can plug in what you're looking to procure and be served up the companies that offer that type of product and service. So I think this idea of generating new business from your B certification, look internally and ask, are you doing business with B corporations? Today we're doing business with 7 different companies who are B certified.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I was trying to determine whether or not we have to stop because we're 5 minutes past time and I haven't been able to get a straight answer. Why don't I'll ask one more question and see if folks want to weigh in on that, and then maybe we can wrap up. Chris, you talked a little bit about on the financing side, some demonstrative information in the investment world. And I think people are looking for a sense of scale on that, even though you mentioned some of those were major investors and that there's $2 billion that have been invested in B Corps. Can you give us a sense of scale as to how much we're making inroads there in terms of B Corpness impacting the investment world?
So I would say that the impact is huge. I mean, I've been studying this for a little over 10 years now, and I would say on the legal front and on the investment front, there's been tremendous progress. I think sort of on the consumer front and expanding to large company. I mean, that's sort of the frontier topics. And I think over the next decade and a half, consumers will come to understand this and large companies will embrace it. But I do think that on the investment standpoint, there's been a tremendous progress. So, I noted there that, many mainstream, probably all major mainstream VC firms have investments in B Corps now. The question here asks, is it driven by better performance or long-term value? I think that these VC companies see that this model provides long-term value. I mean, one of the VCs that actually end up becoming a B Corp, a VC firm called Fifth Wall, that traditionally invests in real estate, very well known in that industry. Real estate, particularly as it relates also to retail. So they have an investment in Allbirds and Cotopaxi. They're a traditional VC firm, and they realize, wow, this B Corp model is something actually that is really valuable to companies, and they ended up becoming a B Corp themselves. I mean, just a traditional VC firm. I think that this spread to the public markets is something that is really, so I think in the private markets, there's all the impact investors like, Bridges, RSF, Triodos, many others that have been driving this. Many of these companies are B Corps themselves. And I think that, is a nice network actually for companies within the B Corp network, access to these venture capital as sort of impact investors. I think mainstream private equity investors have come on board in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think that, with the 3 IPOs that I mentioned, just that happened the last couple of months, another set of things that have happened is, companies that are already public are actually taking shareholder votes to change their articles of incorporation to become B Corp benefit corporations. So this also happened this summer, whereby Danone, a French company, did this. Amalgamated Bank, U.S.-based, financial services company, took a shareholder vote in July to change its articles of corporation to put stakeholder language. And Viva, a cloud computing company in the healthcare space, is going to take a shareholder vote soon to change into a public benefit corporation. So this is not like individuals buying in an IPO, and they know the company has a social focus. This is where there is, existing investors, and the company is changing to become a stakeholder-driven company at the legal level. And at least in the Danone and Amalgamated Bank cases, those passed with over 99%. So I think that this is something that there's been tremendous success in getting investors into these markets. Whereas when I started studying this, it was, people thought you were crazy if you would do a business like this.
Great, and I would note, and I don't know that I have the exact up-to-date statistics, but I think we're 32 states and the district that have passed benefit corp legislation at this point.
It's over 36. Last I heard 36, but then I heard 38, but I didn't know if that included the district and Puerto Rico. So it's either 36 plus those two or 38 plus those two.
Awesome. Well, I think we're keeping our participants from other sessions. So I would ask if anybody had any closing remarks from the panel before we wrap up and move on.
I would just say that for folks who are not yet certified or not yet familiar with the BIA, it can look pretty daunting. It's complicated, it's rigorous. It is absolutely getting more rigorous, as someone said earlier, having been through it 3 times. But just not to be intimidated by that, right? It really is, it's intended as a guide, right? The tens of thousands of companies that have used it just as that, not even working toward certification intentionally at this point. And so it's a great playbook, and so I would just really encourage people to be curious and open and playful with it as a set of, just this new way that I think the arc of history, bends for justice, we're inevitably going this way. And so you'll be ahead of the game if you are at least literate with it, even if you're not quite at the 80 points yet, or even if you're in nowhere near a position to get your company to 80 points. It's a bottom up, top down, and through the middle movement. So I just really encourage people not to be put off by the rigor and complexity.
That's a great point, and I would echo that. I tell people often that the certification, it's great when you finish and you get certified and you've got that logo to put on your website. That's great, but it's kind of like getting your college diploma. That piece of paper is less important than the hard work that went into actually getting there. And so really a big part of the benefit is the learning that you go through. And I would venture to say that it's impossible to go through the impact assessment, not even the full certification, but just go through the impact assessment without getting ideas of things that you can do and saying, hey, why am I not doing that? What can I do better? And that's really a big part of the benefit. The last thing that I'll say, because I spend a lot of time in B Corp circles, and we tend to think this is big, but and it's big and it's growing, but there are still fewer than 4,000 certified B Corps worldwide. So we're just in our second decade. We are very much, I would say, at the stage of early adoption. When you think of how innovation and ideas spread, we're still very much in those early stages. And I would just encourage everyone to look at ways that you can support the movement. For some, it might be getting your business certified as a B Corp. For others, it might be just using the impact assessment as a tool. For others, it might be just being more conscientious in terms of your own purchasing and buying, B Corp certified coffee and beer and other things instead of, non-B Corp certified. But it's going to take all of us to really affect the type of change that, many of us believe are needed. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
I totally echo what both Nell and Carolina said. And it is a lot of work but it's also a really powerful conversation tool that forces you to think about, how are you going to measure what matters? How are you going to give back? Like, how can you bake in impact into what you do as an organization? And plus, by taking that time, it's really helpful from a strategic standpoint. Like when you nail down your organization's why, you get your mission, vision, values down in a really clear way. I mean, that drives strategic decision making. That drives culture. It is the foundation that sets you up for success. So, thank you for being here today, and I'm excited to see many of you hopefully join the community.
We mentioned earlier the community is incredible, right? So once you're there, whether you're certifying or not, you don't have to do it all on your own. The B Corp community is incredibly sharing. So, employee handbooks, policies are all readily available. So you're not starting from scratch. You don't have to figure out, if you're in the food service world or what have you, there's lots of folks in your sector that can provide you with plug and play policies and other information to help make that journey easier. And as Carolina said, it's all the hard work that leads up to it. It's all the hard work that comes after it. And there are also, the B Local groups that help organize this build session, and B Locals groups around the world that are available. I imagine somewhere today they'll be sharing the websites of each of the B Locals that are involved. And, B Local Mid-Atlantic, and I know it's the same for all the B Locals, we're not there just in service of the existing B Corp community. In fact, it's just the opposite. We're trying to grow the sustainable business movement. So all those resources are readily available to anyone with interest, whether you work for a B Corp or not. So I would encourage you to tap into all that information and the great books that are out there, including Chris's, and all of us are, acting as resources. It's part of what we do. It's part of the expectation of ourselves to grow the movement. So I think with that, I'd love to thank everyone on the panel for your participation and great words of wisdom, and all of our participants. And I think Gabby will be shutting us down, and hopefully that moves us into the other sessions, and we'll visit with you for the rest of the day. Thank you again.